Welcome to our channel, Crime Loom, the place where true crime stories come alive. It was the early 1960s in Boston. The city was busy and peaceful, but that peace was about to be broken. One by one, women began to die in their own homes, strangled with their own clothes. No one knew who the killer was or how he got inside. Fear spread through every street, every apartment, every heart. Doors were locked, windows were barred, and people whispered one name: the Boston Strangler. This is the true story of how a city was trapped in terror, how one man confessed to the crimes, and how the mystery still lives on today. It was the early 1960s in Boston, Massachusetts. The city was busy and full of life. People went to work, students filled the colleges, and families lived peacefully in their homes. But one day, fear started to spread. Something dark was happening. Someone was killing women and no one knew who it was. The newspapers would soon give this killer a name that the whole world would remember: the Boston Strangler. At first, nobody understood that the murders were connected. In June 1962, a 55-year-old woman named Anna Sleezers was found dead in her apartment. She had been strangled with the belt from her own bathrobe. The police thought it was a robbery gone wrong, but nothing valuable was taken. Her apartment was strangely neat, almost as if the killer had taken his time. People whispered about it, but soon tried to forget. No one knew this was only the beginning. A few weeks later, another woman was found dead. Then another. The women were all killed in their own homes. There were no signs of forced entry. The doors were locked and nothing seemed stolen. The killer had somehow talked his way inside, killed and left quietly. Each victim was strangled with something from her own home: stockings, scarves, or belts. The killer often tied the knots in a strange bow. This small detail made the crimes even more terrifying. By the end of 1962, the city of Boston was full of fear. 13 women would die before it was over, their lives taken in the same cold, quiet way. The victims were young and old. Some were poor, some rich. Some lived in big buildings, others in small apartments. There seemed to be no pattern. No one was safe. People began locking their doors at all times. Hardware stores sold out of locks and chains. Women refused to let repairmen or strangers into their homes. Neighbors started checking on each other. Even the sound of a knock on the door made hearts race. The city that had once felt safe was now living in constant fear. The police were under great pressure. Reporters filled the streets and followed every clue. The newspapers used bold letters to tell each story, making the fear even greater. The term "the Boston Strangler" appeared in headlines, and soon everyone used that name. The killer had become a ghost that haunted every home in Boston. Detectives tried everything to find him. They questioned hundreds of people. They searched apartments, studied fingerprints, and compared notes. But the killer was always one step ahead. The city's best minds worked day and night, but there were no solid clues. There were no witnesses, no footprints, no one who had seen the killer come or go. Many people believed that the killer was clever and charming. He had to be, because so many of the victims had let him in. Maybe he pretended to be a repairman or a salesman. Maybe he smiled and spoke kindly until he gained their trust. Once he was inside, the women had no chance. The attacks were fast and silent. The victims were found in similar ways. Some were lying on their beds. Some were on the floor. The killer often arranged their bodies in strange positions. The scenes looked almost staged, as if he wanted the police to see his work. Sometimes he even covered the bodies with blankets or placed objects nearby. The pattern was always disturbing and personal. As the months passed, the people of Boston became desperate. The police department created special task forces. The governor got involved. Psychiatrists were called to study the case and build a profile. They said the killer was likely a man who lived a normal life by day but carried dark thoughts inside. He might have been abused as a child or had deep anger toward women. But this was only a guess. In 1963, the killings seemed to slow down, but the fear remained. Every new report of a woman found dead sent a wave of panic through the city. The newspapers printed long stories about the victims: who they were, where they lived, what kind of lives they had before they were taken. People began to feel like they knew them. Each story added to the sadness and anger. Meanwhile, Boston's police were running out of leads. There were hundreds of tips, but most led nowhere. Men were arrested, questioned, and released again. Detectives started to doubt they would ever find the killer. Some began to think that there might be more than one strangler. The crimes were similar, but not all exactly the same. Was it possible that more than one person was behind the murders? The question only added to the confusion. In neighborhoods across the city, people formed watch groups. Men walked their wives and sisters to work. Women carried keys between their fingers for protection. Fear had become part of everyday life. The newspapers made the story even bigger. They printed photos of the victims and gave them names, turning the tragedy into a story everyone followed. Reporters asked police officers for every small detail, and sometimes those details got twisted or exaggerated. The more people read, the more frightened they became. The city's image was changing. Boston, once known for its colleges, its culture, and its history, was now known as the City of the Strangler. Tourists stopped visiting. Residents felt ashamed and angry. Everyone wanted answers, but none came. By late 1963, the police had collected boxes of evidence, but none of it led to a suspect. They found fingerprints, hair, and fibers, but forensic science at that time was not advanced enough to match them. There were no computers or DNA tests. Investigations depended on human memory, notes, and comparison by hand. The murders had a strange pattern of stopping and starting again. Just when people began to relax, another body would be found. Each time, the same story. A woman found dead in her home. No sign of a break-in. No clue of who had done it. People started to believe the killer might be someone they saw every day. A milkman, a delivery driver, a neighbor. Anyone could be the strangler. This thought was the most frightening of all. In one apartment building, a woman refused to answer the door for weeks. Another moved out of the city completely. The fear spread like smoke through the streets. Detectives continued to work night and day. Some believed the killer would slip up sooner or later. Others thought he might never be caught. Police officers were tired, frustrated, and haunted by the faces of the victims. They knew time was running out, and then in 1964, the killing suddenly stopped. No one knew why. There were no new victims. Some believed the killer had died or gone to another city. Others thought he was in jail for a different crime. The silence was both a relief and a mystery. The people of Boston slowly began to breathe again, but the fear never fully went away. The name Boston Strangler stayed in every mind. Women still looked over their shoulders. Families still checked their locks twice before bed. The police had no suspect, no confession, and no clear answers. The city had been scarred forever. The story of the Boston Strangler was far from over, and soon a new name would appear. A man who would confess to the crimes and claimed to be the monster who had terrified a city. But was he telling the truth? Months passed after the last murder, and Boston began to calm down. People started to believe that the nightmare was finally over. The newspapers printed fewer stories about the Strangler, and the city tried to return to normal life. But for the families of the victims, peace never came. The police still had no answers. The name Boston Strangler was still written in every police file and whispered in every dark corner. Then, something unexpected happened. In 1965, a man named Albert DeSalvo was arrested, but not for murder. He had been caught for a series of sexual assaults that people called the Measuring Man and the Green Man cases. These crimes involved breaking into women's homes, pretending to be a model scout or repairman, and attacking them. The police didn't connect him to the Boston Strangler at first. He was just another criminal in a long list of offenders. Albert DeSalvo was an ordinary-looking man. He was in his early 30s, married, and had children. He worked as a handyman and lived in a small apartment. To most people, he seemed normal, even friendly. But those who knew him well said he could change quickly. Sometimes he was calm and polite. Other times he was angry and strange. He had grown up in a poor family and had a difficult childhood. His father was violent and the home was full of fear. When DeSalvo was questioned about his sexual assault crimes, he surprised everyone. He began to talk about things no one had asked him. He said he wanted to confess to something bigger. He told stories of killing women in Boston, stories that sounded eerily similar to the Strangler murders. At first, no one believed him. Many men had claimed to be the Boston Strangler, hoping for attention. But when detectives listened closely, They noticed that DeSalvo knew certain details, things that had never been made public. He described the apartments, the way the women were found, and even the type of knots used to tie the scarves. It was enough to make investigators pay attention. DeSalvo said he remembered every murder. He spoke calmly, almost like he was talking about someone else's life. He didn't seem angry or proud, only tired. He told police he wanted to confess so the families of the victims could have peace. But there was one problem. There was no physical evidence linking him to the murders. The police checked everything. They compared fingerprints, hair, and other samples. None of them matched DeSalvo. The technology of the time was limited and DNA testing did not exist yet. So the case depended entirely on his confession. To understand DeSalvo better, the police sent him to a psychiatrist named Dr. Ames Roby, who spent many hours talking to him. DeSalvo described in great detail how he killed his victims. He said he didn't plan to kill them at first, only to talk or maybe steal something. But then something would snap and he couldn't control himself. He told the doctor he felt powerful when he killed. He also said that afterward he felt empty and sick. He claimed he wanted to stop but didn't know how. His stories were confusing, sometimes detailed and other times strange. Some things didn't match the real crime scenes. This made many people wonder if he was lying or if he was remembering things that didn't happen. The newspapers quickly learned about DeSalvo's confession. The headlines shouted, "Boston Strangler caught!" The people of Boston felt a mix of relief and disbelief. Could this quiet man really be the monster they had feared for years? DeSalvo's lawyer, F. Lee Bailey, became famous for defending him. Bailey said DeSalvo should not be treated as a normal criminal, but as someone with serious mental problems. He wanted DeSalvo to go to a hospital instead of prison. He also believed that the confession might help solve one of the biggest mysteries in America. But because there was no physical proof, DeSalvo was never charged with the Boston Strangler murders. Instead, he was tried for his other crimes, the sexual assaults. In court, he admitted to everything. The jury found him guilty, and he was sentenced to life in prison. Even after the trial, people kept arguing about whether DeSalvo was truly the Boston Strangler. Some detectives believed he was. They said no one else could have known those secret details. But others were not so sure. Some of the murders looked different from the others. Some victims were much older, some younger. The way they were killed was not always exactly the same. A few police officers thought there might have been more than one killer. Maybe DeSalvo had killed some of the women, but not all. Maybe someone else had copied his crimes. Or maybe he had heard details in jail and made up stories to sound important. In prison, DeSalvo often spoke about the murders. He told his cellmates and guards that he wanted to sell his story. He even wrote letters about it. But as time went on, he began to fear for his life. He told friends that people wanted to silence him, that others didn't want the truth to come out. Then, in 1973, something strange happened. Albert DeSalvo was found dead in his prison cell. He had been stabbed several times. No one knew exactly why or who did it. Some said it was because of money. Others said it was because he had talked too much about the murders. His death added another layer of mystery to the case. After his death, people began to wonder even more if he had really been the Boston Strangler. Without solid proof, no one could be sure. The police had his confession, but the evidence was missing. The families of the victims were left with the same questions they had before. Years turned into decades. New investigators looked at the old files again and again. They hoped that new science might finally bring answers. In the 1990s and 2000s, DNA testing became possible. Scientists began testing the old evidence from the Strangler cases, hoping to match it to DeSalvo's DNA. For many years, the results were unclear. Some samples were too old or too damaged to test. But then, in 2013, there was a breakthrough. The police found DNA evidence from one of the victims, Mary Sullivan, the last woman killed in the series. Her body had been kept carefully, and new testing showed a clear DNA profile. When they compared it to DeSalvo's family DNA, it matched. Later, they exhumed DeSalvo's body and confirmed it completely. The DNA from Mary Sullivan's crime scene matched Albert DeSalvo. It proved he had killed at least one of the victims. The police finally announced that part of the mystery was solved, but questions still remained. If he killed Mary Sullivan, did that mean he killed all the others too? Some experts still say no. They believe the first few murders might have been done by someone else, and DeSalvo copied them later. Others believe he did them all but changed his methods as time went on. No one can say for sure. The truth may have died with Albert DeSalvo, yet even with the doubts, the city of Boston finally felt some closure. The case that had terrified its people for years had at least one clear answer. The Boston Strangler had a name, a face, and a story, though one still full of mystery and unanswered questions. Even after the DNA tests proved that Albert DeSalvo killed Mary Sullivan, the story of the Boston Strangler did not end. It continued to live in books, movies, and people's memories. Many still wondered who the real Boston Strangler was, and if DeSalvo had told the full truth before his death. In Boston, the fear had faded, but the name still echoed through the city. For the people who had lived through those dark years, the memory was never far away. They remembered the panic, the locked doors, and the sleepless nights. For them, it was not just a story. It was something real, something that had changed the way people lived. Albert DeSalvo's story remained confusing. He had confessed to all 13 murders, but some of his confessions did not match the facts. For example, he described the wrong rooms or the wrong order of events. In a few cases, he said things that the police knew were false. That made people question how much of his story was true. Some believed that DeSalvo might have been tricked or influenced. While in jail, he had talked to other prisoners, and it was possible that he learned details about the murders from them. Maybe he wanted fame. Maybe he thought that confessing would make him seem important. Or maybe, deep inside, he believed he really had done those terrible things, even if he had not. Others said he was the true killer, and that the mistakes in his confession were just confusion or poor memory. The murders had happened over several years, and maybe he simply forgot some details. Those who believed in his guilt pointed out how calm and emotionless he was when describing the crimes. He seemed to feel no shame or sadness, only a cold kind of pride. Still, no one could ignore the doubts. Police officers who had worked on the case were divided. Some said DeSalvo's confession brought them peace. Others said it only created more questions. A few even believed that more than one killer was at work in Boston during those years. In later years, authors and crime experts studied the case again. They read the police files, the interviews, and the court records. They watched old videos of DeSalvo's confessions and noticed things the public had never seen. Some said he looked like a man pretending to remember. Others thought his words carried a strange truth, something only the killer could know. As time passed, the Boston Strangler became more than just a man. He became a symbol of fear and mystery. Movies and documentaries told the story again and again. In 1968, the film The Boston Strangler came out, starring Tony Curtis as DeSalvo. The movie showed him as a broken man, both killer and victim of his own mind. People were shocked to see such a famous actor play such a dark role. In 2023, another movie, Boston Strangler, told the story from a new point of view, that of two women journalists, Loretta McLaughlin and Jean Cole. They were real reporters who had worked on the case in the 1960s. Their work helped connect the murders before the police did. The film showed how brave they were, fighting to be heard in a world that didn't always listen to women. Even today, the story continues to fascinate people. True crime lovers and historians still debate what really happened. Some believe that DeSalvo killed only the last few women, while the earlier murders were done by someone else. Others believe all 13 murders were connected, and that DeSalvo was indeed the Boston Strangler. Forensic experts have tried to go back to the old evidence to test it again, but many of the samples have been lost, damaged, or are too old to test. That means the full truth may never be known. Still, every few years, someone new tries to solve the mystery again, hoping to find one missing piece that will finally explain everything. For the families of the victims, the story remains painful. Some of them accepted that DeSalvo was the killer. Others never believed it. They lived with questions for decades, hoping for closure that never fully came. Some said that the only real justice was that the killing had stopped. Albert DeSalvo's own family also suffered. His wife and children had to live with his name, a name that had become famous for all the wrong reasons. His daughter once said she did not know what to believe. She wanted to think her father was innocent. but she could not ignore what the world said about him. Even in death, DeSalvo's story continued to twist and turn. His murder in prison was never fully solved. Some said he was killed by another inmate over money. Others believed he was silenced by people who did not want him to speak more about the Strangler murders. There were rumors that he had been about to reveal something important, something that might have changed the story completely. The mystery of the Boston Strangler also changed how America thought about crime. It was one of the first cases where the term serial killer began to appear. It showed that a murderer could be anyone, a neighbor, a husband, a friendly face on the street. It taught police departments across the country that killers could follow patterns and that crimes needed to be studied together, not separately. The case also helped develop new methods in criminal investigation. Years later, the lessons learned from the Boston Strangler would be used to catch other serial killers. Detectives began to use psychology, studying the minds of killers to predict their actions. This was the start of what would later be called criminal profiling. But in the 1960s, Boston did not have those tools. They had fear, confusion, and a city full of grief. The police did their best, but they were fighting a kind of crime that was new to them. The story of the Boston Strangler became not only a crime story, but also a story about how a city learned to face its darkest fears. Today, if you walk through Boston, you would not see any signs of the terror that once filled its streets. The buildings stand quiet, the same ones where people once double-locked their doors in fear. The apartments that were once crime scenes are now homes again, but for those who know the story, the past still lingers in the air. The Boston Strangler story remains one of America's most infamous and haunting crimes. It reminds people how fear can take over a city, how mystery can live on for generations, and how truth is sometimes more complicated than anyone can imagine. Albert DeSalvo's name will always be tied to that time. Whether he was the true Boston Strangler or just a man caught in the shadows of someone else's crimes, his confession brought answers, but also more questions. His death closed one chapter but opened another. In the end, the Boston Strangler story is about more than just one man or one city. It is about the darkness that can hide behind an ordinary smile, and the hope that truth, even if it takes years, will one day come to light. And though the murders stopped long ago, the echoes of those years still whisper through Boston's history, a reminder of the fear that once lived there and of the people who never stopped searching for the truth. The Boston Strangler story still echoes through time. More than 60 years have passed, but the mystery remains. Was Albert DeSalvo truly the killer, or was someone else behind the fear that gripped a city? We may never know every answer, but the memory of those years will never fade. The murders changed Boston forever and taught the world how darkness can hide behind an ordinary face. This was not just a crime story. It was a story of fear, truth, and the search for justice that still continues today. Subscribe to Crime Loom, and join us as we unravel more heists, mysteries, and untold legends.